Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 12th of February 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Lots to get through today. We're going to start off straight away with Oxfam and the allegations that a number of members of staff abused their position while they were supposedly giving aid in Haiti in 2011 following the disaster there. This is apparently a number of people, including the charity's country director, Roland van Havermeren, are alleged to have used prostitutes at a villa rented to him by Oxfam in the aftermath of the earthquake in 2010. Oxfam apparently knew about the allegations at the time. They launched an internal investigation. 4 members of staff were dismissed, but the 3 others involved in this, including the country director, they were allowed to resign without any without any formal proceedings. He went on to work within the charity sector elsewhere. Now, what's fascinating about this to me, Patrick, is the comments that were made by the chief executive of Oxfam to Time magazine. I just want to play a 5-second clip of this because he's really admitting that it's the tip of the iceberg.
There is not a single organisation in which there has not been sexual abuse and exploitation. And Oxfam is certainly no worse than most other international organisations and actually has tried in many ways to be better. We've also been much more transparent than any other organisation I know on this.
So no need to worry, Patrick. Other charities doing much worse than Oxfam. Really tip of the iceberg, nothing to see here, move along. We'll come back onto that in a second. Oxfam receives £176 million a year from the British government, about £106 million from donations and so on. Penny Mordaunt said, what is so disturbing about Oxfam is that when this was reported to them, they completely failed to do the right thing. This seems to be an allegation which is made time and time again, not just with third sector organisations, but a host of organisations that have failed to protect the vulnerable or have seen their staff doing things which are inappropriate. Haiti, Patrick, has had allegations going well beyond the use of prostitutes. This is Zero Hedge publishing an article, the Clinton Stillsby trafficking scandal and how the media attempted to cover it up. Then also we've got to make the point that not just in Haiti but worldwide we've got other problems in other charities. UK charity boss Simon Harris jailed for Kenya child sex abuse. At what point is this issue of abusive position and abusive power within all sectors of society, not just the charity sector, got to be taken seriously?
The common thread that I've seen through all of these stories that I'll say is, to me, the thing to pay attention to is that in almost every case there is some admission or there's some skepticism from critics about, or admission from people in the organizations, Mike, that said this was a great cover for this abuse or this crime. Nobody suspected it, and it was because of the work they were doing, the great work they were doing. That seems to me the common theme we see time and time again with all of these stories. And so I think there's something in that, Mike, that you really need to look at closely. That needs to be explored. How much of the public image, the marketing, the money that these organizations spend on marketing is enormous. They've got huge corporate budgets equal to some big commercial brands. And so what is that money buying is my question. Is that money buying a sort of level of impunity because they managed to launder the reputation to such a degree that most people, even within the organization, won't even suspect that anything's going on. These internal audits, nobody's prosecuted in some cases. People may be sacked or moved to another branch or another NGO. I think this really needs to be taken seriously. Have a look at this.
Oxfam's response to criticism of the fact that their country head was not sacked and was given the opportunity to resign, their excuse was that, well, he wouldn't have gone with a positive reference. There seems to be a level of unreality in the minds of these people as to what has actually been done here.
Yeah, I think I don't know what to say. It's just a combination of Stockholm syndrome and something else, but there's this kind of idea that they're still doing great work, and it's a few bad apples and so forth, and it seems to be the overriding excuse we hear all the time.
Well, Boris Johnson is in Bangladesh at the moment, visiting the Rohingya there, no doubt doing some great work over there, and I'm sure there's no abuse going on amongst those camps at all, Patrick. But he began on Friday a 4-day tour to Bangladesh, Burma and Thailand. He was in Bangladesh on Friday. He met the Prime Minister, he met the Foreign Minister, and really what's he doing? He's just, well, not very much, continuing to promote this nonsense that the Rohingya crisis is solely the responsibility of the Burmese government. No other actors involved in that whatsoever, according to the British government at least. He said the plight of the Rohingya and the suffering they have had to endure is one of the most shocking humanitarian disasters of our time. This is a man-made tragedy that could be resolved with the right political will, tolerance and cooperation from all those involved. I want to see and hear for myself the terrible things these people have been through, and I'll be talking to State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi and other regional leaders about how we can work together to resolve the appalling crisis. Well, he went on to speak to Aung San Suu Kyi on Saturday, and then he was also visiting Cox's Bazar, talking to people, 688,000 people they claim, and he toured the camp. It's like a tourist destination for him. Penny Mordaunt was there a couple of weeks ago. I mean, what are your thoughts on the Rohingya crisis? We've discussed it before. It's a complicated situation. There's no doubt that it's complicated in Burma. But as I've pointed out a number of times yet, when the BBC is pushing out images, apparently drawings from children, and the person holding the gun and the knives is not looking like a Burmese soldier, there's clearly more going on here than the British Foreign Secretary and his sidekick Penny Mordaunt would like us to believe.
I don't think there's enough focus put on Bangladesh and Bangladesh's responsibilities, Bangladesh's role in this crisis as well. It seems to be that a lot of the pressure is being placed on the Aung San Suu Kyi government in Burma, and then the story really ends there. What they're trying to do clearly, and what we've discussed on this show before, is that they're trying to create a narrative in regards to that narrative, that template, that these people need a homeland and cries for autonomy. And this is a slow process. They seed the idea this decade, and maybe they'll get their autonomous Kurdish-like state in 10 years or something like this, with enough crisis and enough sort of humanitarian inertia into the situation. But with that, what happens with this, Mike? As we have seen in Iraqi Kurdistan, the West get a beachhead in a new part of the world. And so look at the U.S. military bases in Iraqi Kurdistan, in Erbil. The United States has colonized Iraqi Kurdistan. So they helped create it, and they've now colonized it. So I see the same sort of pattern, same process going on here with the so-called Rohingya crisis.
Well, I wonder how much of this is about, are you suggesting that this is about getting a presence close to the Chinese border?
Not only that, but being in a position possibly to disrupt the Chinese Belt and Road project. And a lot of this sort of tributary projects that are coming off the main Silk Road project through places like Thailand, Pakistan, Burma, Southeast Asia, and so forth. So disrupting the Asia regional area, of which China is not a member, but yet China presides over effectively. And so this is a really important part of the Belt and Road project. And this will transform economic activity and societies right the way across Asia. And look at what's happening in Asia. Look at what's happening in Europe. Europe, zero growth. Zero growth. China, 3%, 4%, 5% growth. That will ripple across Asia. So you're going to have a disparity in terms of where the economic activity is, and it's not, the energy is going eastwards on that. And then we'll be buying those products and so forth. So That's what I see long term. It's just strategic.
Right. Well, we're going to come on to the Belt and Road again in a second, but just before we do that, let's go to Syria. Now, this is New China. Syria no longer tolerates Israeli attacks by downing its fighter jet in reprisal, and they're saying that they are emphasizing a report from the 10th of February about the downing of the Israeli jet. There have been many Israeli strikes, they're saying, in recent years, nearly 100 strikes in 5 years. And that's according to a former Israeli Air Force commander, Amir Ashel. And they're saying that Syria will no longer tolerate the repeated Israeli attacks on its military positions. They quote Maher Ihsan, and a Syria political expert, saying that it's a message that Syria will no longer accept the hit-and-run attacks by Israel. It has two messages. The first is that the Syrian air defences are now on high-level readiness in comparison with previous years. And second, it's about the availability of the political will of the Syrian leadership, reflected by the victories of the Syrian army and its recapture of most of the Syrian areas. That's really the point here, isn't it, Patrick? Syria has been tolerating these attacks from Israel over, as it says, 5 years at least. But they've been otherwise engaged. They haven't been in a position to sort of respond directly to those. And they've sort of had to suck them up, really, and just accept them. But now that they have had such success in regaining control of the country, perhaps Israel would need to be thinking twice about future attacks.
Undoubtedly. In fact, after this F-16 downed by Syrian anti-aircraft fire, second F-15 was also clipped, we're told, and they do fly in pairs on those missions, so there were two planes. And of course, Israel announced it's going to unleash massive attacks in retribution to this act of aggression by Syria, and they're blaming it on Iran as well somehow. But what happened, Mike? A lot of bluster in the media, a lot of inflated stories, even a fake image, which the great Middle East correspondent Elijah Magner tweeted on Twitter, showing that they recycled an image of an airstrike from 2015, and this somehow circulated its way into the Israeli press. So they can't just go in all guns blazing now. They know that they might lose jets, and how much does an F-16 cost? 30 million, 40 million? I don't know what they're going for these days, but Israel can't afford to lose one of those a week. So basically, there's no longer a monopoly of force over the skies of the Middle East, which Israel has enjoyed for quite some time. And Syria has not been in a position, not tactically, not militarily, and not in terms of the alliances that it has, and also freeing up space and energy to defend itself against Israel after pushing back ISIS and Nusra. And you have to remember, this whole airstrike and retaliation incident we saw this week started because of a drone that was doing what I believe and many others reconnaissance work, because after all, isn't Syria fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda affiliates on the southern front along the Israeli and Syrian border? And so for Israel to say that this drone, which is effectively a toy compared to a British or an American Reaper, is attacking Israel, do you think Iran would send a propeller drone that's kind of a large hobby drone and say that's an attack on Israel, and this is Iranian aggression, and we need to stop this? And so I'm also going to add too that this is one of the reasons why the United States is occupying parts of Syria, and the parts that they're occupying are strategic in that they stretch from the Midlands of Syria to the Western-controlled borders like Jordan, providing a corridor for Israeli airstrikes to come into central Syria over airspace that isn't protected by anti-aircraft batteries. So the U.S. and Israel are effectively working together.
Indeed, in an interview to TASS a couple of days ago, the Russian ambassador to Syria is once again bringing up the issue of the U.S. activity in the north of the country and the fact that they're organizing a new Syrian army, as they're describing it. Now, they've said this before, and we've reported it before, but they clearly feel that they need to keep this in the forefront of the discussion because they're obviously concerned about it. So he's saying that they're building a new Syrian army. As for the US, he said, it apparently relies rather not on al-Nusra, but on the Kurds and the Democratic Union Party, as well as on the Arabic armed units in Syria's east, along with other militants. They enroll former IS, Nusra, and other terrorists. And he said that regarding al-Nusra, it was one of the last remaining trump cards. However, all those terrorists are not reliable allies. It's dangerous to be playing such games with terrorists. They must be eliminated in joint efforts. So even despite everything that's going on, the Russians still trying to hold a hand out and say, join us in dealing with this problem. But clearly still absolutely concerned about what's going on, what the US is up to in Northern Syria.
Don't you find the difference between the Russian diplomacy and foreign representatives and the difference between them and the United States or Britain? Russians are talking straight, they're on topic, they're on the issue, they're talking about real events and things on the ground. They're not hiding an agenda. The US and the UK and France and those other countries, but mainly the US, are operating covertly for the most part, illegally in the country, so they therefore have to lie and they have to use deceit and duplicity just in order to maintain their position. So who is the good actor then internationally? Is the good actor Russia or is the good actor the United States? I think it's pretty obvious from this scenario who the real statesmen and good actors are.
Absolutely. And speaking of Russia, you wanted to bring this on this is from RT. Conventional strikes, no nukes. Emergencies Ministry outlines likely scenario if Russia is attacked.
This is a very interesting report, and obviously if you go to this report on RT, you can link to a 164-page report, and what this is effectively doing, this is a very symbolic act by the government. They're basically saying if we are attacked by NATO, and that's who the attack would come from, we are not going to respond with nuclear weapons. They're going to respond conventionally. So, that should put Western European people and Eastern European people a little bit at ease with some of the aggressive talk we've heard coming from the West over the last couple of years with regards to how they're going to counter the Russian threat. So I'd like to see a report like this. Talk about transparency, Mike.
Yeah.
Are we going to get this level of transparency, or at least an attempt to say what the position is militarily from NATO or the United States on this matter? I'd like to see that.
It's within the last 12 months, I think, if I remember rightly, the Labour Party challenged the Conservative Party, Theresa May, to say whether they would use nuclear weapons if attacked, and they refused to make that statement. They refused to say either way whether, and they said, well, on the basis that if we were to make a statement, then it would effectively remove the threat. The Russians seem to have done exactly that.
Yeah. Well, nuclear powers should be able to make those statements concurrently. I don't see why they can't. Certainly, there was this effort during the Cold War to have some reciprocity on this issue. Is that happening now? That's worrying to me.
Yeah. Well, this is the Center for Strategic and International Studies. It's a think tank in the United States. They've released a 64-page report entitled Meeting the China Challenge, Responding to China's Managed Economy. And they are really pretty negative about the whole Belt and Road Initiative. They want to see it destroyed. They call it China's industrial policy. And they are saying military tensions are dangerous, but the greatest test is economic and will come from China's industrial policy and its effect on the global economy and American security. They're worried that there is a growing consensus in Washington that Beijing operates a highly discriminatory economic system that has produced an increasingly unbalanced relationship detrimental to the interests of the United States and China's other trading partners. As a result, there are calls for America and others to take steps to tame China's industrial policy and take actions to serve American interests. Well, this is quite staggering because it seems to me that America's economy is in such a bad way that perhaps America's interests lie with the Belt and Road if they were interested in getting involved in some of those projects, but apparently not. But the think tanks are suggesting quite the opposite. They need to destroy the Belt and Road instead. They say a crucial element of China's strategy is overtaking the United States as it has overtaken other nations. As part of this, China has a well-financed strategy to create domestic industries intended to displace foreign suppliers, dominate standards making and reshape global norms. The issue is how to change China's nationalist industrialist policies and end their disruptive effects on other economies. This is quite staggering, really, Patrick, because we hear this term disruption being used in a positive way by the proponents of globalism and the rules-based international order. We had Theresa May, when she was visiting China last week, saying that the Belt and Road's great so long as they abide by the rules-based international order. And really, we've got to think about what that is. What is the rules-based international order?
The rules are whatever the prevailing powers say the rules are at that moment in time. There's a set of rules, but obviously some countries are allowed to break those rules if they have enough money, enough clout, enough influence. And to be fair, Mike, China might be that power in the future, and they may set the rules-based international order, and they may break those rules as well. So my point on the Belt and Road in the West is they should be involved in it and maybe offering to invest in it now. Otherwise, it's going to be more expensive for them to get in the future. So I think it's in the West's best interest to try to partner as much as possible with China, but instead some people are looking at this in an adversarial way, including people like Steve Bannon in the United States, and I think that's absolutely the wrong way to look at it. But there are people who profit off conflict, who profit off of these rivalries, and who might like to see a few wars started over this over the next couple of decades, and those will be very lucrative wars, let me assure you. So that's, to me, the wrong way of looking at this. But then again, who's been in power post-World War II? Have we had the right thinkers and the right people in power? That's debatable.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, let's come back to the UK and Brexit. And I'm hashtag Sorosgate. I mean, we've got Russiagate in the United States is about Russian intervention in political affairs, the allegation of. But this isn't an allegation, this is being openly admitted. So £400,000 investment in the anti-Brexit campaign last week. They're now saying that, well, if that campaign group raises £100,000 of crowdfunded money, that they will match that. So that's going to be £500,000. But this is direct evidence of interference in UK politics by an outside actor. Not a state actor, I'll grant you, but nonetheless. We covered this on Friday's programme. Go back and have a look at that if you want to see what is behind this Best for Britain, campaign group. But an article on 21 Wire today, Patrick, Brexit, Soros and others guilty of foreign meddling, not Russia.
Well, this is a great report here filed by Miles Elliott, a writer at 21st Century Wire, and he's pointing out here we now have clear evidence of two actors. One is a non-state actor, George Soros, and his Open Society and empire, and also the French linked with the En Marche, linked with the French government, backed by Emmanuel Macron, who are trying to influence opinion and policy and the destiny of this country. In Britain, it's not the Russians, ladies and gentlemen. It's France, it's Soros, and who else is it? It could be other people as well. I'm going to also add, Mike, quickly, with that amount of crowdfunding money, who is to say who is putting money in the crowdfunding hat? Do we know exactly what individuals or organizations are donating to those crowdfunding pots? And they're quite big pots. So this is something that is going to come up in the future as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, sticking with the UK then, the police are to trial a new mobile fingerprinting technology, which is being issued by the Home Office. It's going to allow frontline officers, they say, across the country to use their smartphones to identify people in less than a minute, saving police time and reducing costs. It's an app on the policeman's or woman's phone. It's combined with the handheld scanner that you can see on screen there, and that means that police will be able to check fingerprints against both criminal and immigration records by connecting to the two live databases, Ident1 and IABS. via the new Biometric Services Gateway. West Yorkshire Police have been trialling the system. 250 scanners have been pushed out, or are going to be pushed out in the next few weeks. And the application is already available to all 5,500 frontline officers and expected to be rolled out to another 20 police forces across England at least by the end of the year. Now this is enabled by Home Office technology. It's going to lead, they say, to amazing cost savings with the new system available at a fraction of the cost of those currently in use. Apparently it's going to cost less than £300 for each one. And it's going to mean that the police don't have to trail you off to a police station to identify you. That's really fantastic news, isn't it? Nick Hurd, who's the Minister for Policing, said the Biometric Services Gateway is just one of a series of national systems the Home Office is designing with policing to give officers information at their fingertips faster than ever before. Now, of course, it should be noted that Britain, like most other common law countries, does not require anybody to identify themselves. I'm not sure what limits are going to be placed on police if they decide that they want you to identify yourself. Clearly, I personally would not be providing a fingerprint, but if they're sitting there with a scanner, is there going to be some element of compulsion in this? This seems to me, it offers a very strong opportunity for the relationship between the relationship between individuals and the police, and the idea of policing by consent to be changed somewhat. This is not a direction I think we should be going in.
No, there have to be coercion, and then some place where you're going to give us a deal will be made on the street. You know, we're going to take you in. It's going to be a big hassle, or you can tick that box right there and put your hand on the scanner. It'll be some sort of system that will be dreamt up, and then it'll be tested, Mike, out in the public, and people will no doubt challenge it. And we'll see where this goes in terms of legality.
Yeah. Right. Justice. Now I'm going to say, this is Kevin Gallagher on screen. That should say HMCTS, which is Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunals Service, but the software has decided to spelling correct that for me, and it now says Hafts. Do apologise for that. But anyway, Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunals Service, he said in a speech last year, or a year and a half ago it is now, he said is responsible for giving people access to digital justice. Now Kevin Gallagher he was previously Chief Information Officer at Channel 4, but ended up working for the Courts and Tribunals Service, and he's responsible for IT and digital strategy. And of course this is all about the new digital justice which is slowly being rolled out in the UK. Now in the speech which he gave in July 2016 on digital transformation of the courts, he said that HMCTS is responsible for giving people and businesses access to justice. This fundamental right of access for all and the knowledge that no one is above the law is something we should be proud of. It is the bedrock of our society. As a justice system, we need to reach the point where it's expected that a police officer will give evidence by video, taking 10 minutes rather than half their working day. We need to stop using prison vans to transport prisoners to and from the courts for a short plea hearing when this could be done online. And we need, as Sir Brian Levison recommended in his review, to limit what happens in the criminal courtroom to just trials and complex sentencing. And he made the point that a year previously, Sir Brian Levison had spoken on the same stage about the upcoming pilot of the digital case system in Southwark and Leeds. This system was designed to make, he says, the relevant papers easily accessible to professional users before the case, with the ability to read and annotate as appropriate. So let's just read that again. He said in his speech in 2016, this system was designed to make the relevant papers easily accessible to professional users before the case, with the ability to read and annotate as appropriate. But over the last couple of weeks, we have heard of case after case where that was exactly not happening. So the police in this case, this was Liam Allen from Beckenham, and he had been accused of rape, and it turned 12 counts of rape and sexual assault. His trial had to be abandoned just before Christmas because the police had finally been ordered to hand over phone records that they held, which they had not passed along digitally to the defence. which would have proved that he was innocent because the text messages and others were showing that there was consent given, right? This has been commented on by this lady, Angela Rafferty, QC, who works for the Criminal Bar Association. She's also at Red Lion Chambers. And she's saying that the justice system is approaching breaking point. It's beginning to happen on both sides, prosecution and defence. All of these cases collapsing because of disclosure issues are a sign of that. So we have this, since 2015, this process going along of making the court system digital and allegedly streamlining the processes involved, and yet we see increasing miscarriages of justice as a result. And here we have a senior lawyer in this country saying that the justice system is approaching breaking point. And this was highlighted in a report from July last year, Making It Fair, a joint inspection of the disclosure of unused material in prosecutions and so on, right? So this issue has been going on for quite some time. And then we see today, or this I think was from just the end of last week, on the Ministry of Justice Digital and Technology blog, a guest post from a lady from the Home Office, So Long Silos, How Content Collaboration Helps Users. And again, just as with the National Health Service and other government agencies, we see the common purpose style leadership language and training and methods of working, the breaking down of barriers between various government departments, which in the process actually increase inefficiencies in the way that systems work. And we're having this pushed extremely hard. So if we want to know why the courts and tribunal service is no longer working for people, this is where we need to look. We need to look at the type of ideology that's being drifted in here. In fact, it's not being drifted in, it's being very actively brought through. And I just want to remind everybody about a series of articles on the UK Column website called The Common Purpose Effect. If people want to understand what's going on in the health service, in the court service, in just about every public service at the moment, and why these systems are breaking down, you need to read these articles and try to understand what it is that's being brought in through so-called leadership training. Mm-hmm. Right, Patrick, Julian Assange.
There he is. So, Julian Assange, we've just found from this latest revelation, and I think that everyone should go look at this for themselves, that the UK government put pressure on Sweden to basically keep Assange's charges alive, basically. And so he's effectively being detained in Knightsbridge in the basement of the Ecuadorian embassy. And so this latest report shows UK prosecutors tried to dissuade Swedish counterparts from basically doing so. And that isn't the first instance of this. We also had back in, I think, 2015, the UK pressured Sweden not to come to London to question Assange, which would have accelerated sort of dropping of his case. And so they were kind of kept from doing that by the UK. So the UK government has been very active in making sure that Julian Assange has been placed in a corner, and so effectively denying him of his due process, of his rights. This is being done to him by another state. And so he's the only offense he has in the UK is that he did a jump bail at the time when he fled for asylum at the Ecuadorian embassy. But seeing that those charges are no longer relevant in Sweden, he should be allowed to walk free, Mike. So we'll find out this week. There's another. I
believe it's tomorrow.
It's tomorrow. Yeah. It is. So I'll probably be commenting on that on another news channel as well. So we'll let you know about that. But UK government is very much involved. So I think this is the hand of the United States working through the British glove to make sure Julian Assange is isolated in this sense and doesn't have any rights. So that's clearly, to my opinion, what's going on.
Okay, Barclays Bank in trouble again, more serious fraud, and this is, well, relates to Qatar and various shenanigans over loans following the 2008 banking collapse. This apparently was Barclays Bank attempting to avoid needing a government bailout. So let's just have a quick look at what was going on. Basically, four major senior executives in Barclays Bank being charged under this latest effort from the Serious Fraud Office. That's John Varley, Roger Jenkins, Thomas Kalaris, and Richard Both. And what seems to have happened is that the Qatar Holdings made a loan of £12 billion to Barclays in order to help bail them out following the financial collapse in 2008. Barclays then apparently lent £2.3 billion back to Qatar Holdings alongside a £332 million advisory bung, you might call it. And then apparently Qatar Holdings took that £2.3 billion loan and used it to prop up Barclays Bank's stock price by buying shares. So the Serious Fraud Office involved in this. But Patrick, it occurred to me that, you know, if we look at the events of 2007, 2008, there aren't too many senior executives of banks that have actually been prosecuted for anything. A few minor players have been prosecuted, a couple in prison, but no senior people. And the links to Qatar strike me as interesting. And of course, the Serious Fraud Office has brought cases in the past regarding the Middle East. Some cases have ended up being dropped with the Serious Fraud Office just happening to lose a whole bunch of documentation with regard to Saudi Arabia. I just wasn't sure whether this was really genuinely an effort to deal with corruption within the banking system, or perhaps there's a bigger geopolitical agenda at work here, you know, in the Middle East with the Saudis and the Qataris. It just seems a bit coincidental.
Yeah, well, I think you've identified the important part of that, Mike, is that Barclays is effectively creating money out of thin air by creating a loan. So where money didn't exist, all of a sudden exists. And as we know, well, we know, but other people might not know, liabilities are counted as assets on the balance sheets of banks. So yeah. You create money out of thin air and it's all of a sudden an asset on your balance sheet and makes your company look stronger. I would love to be able to do that as a business. I'm sure we all would, but we're not allowed to do that. Only the banks can do that.
Absolutely. Now, Resolution Foundation today has published a report, An Unhealthy Interest, Debt Distress and the Consequences of Raising Rates. This follows Mark Carney's comments last week that because the British economy is doing so well, that there's a possibility that interest rates will rise more and faster than previously envisaged. But what does the Resolution Foundation say? They say standing at nearly £1.9 trillion, UK household debt remains a big issue. It is one that is very real and very obvious relevance for those families having to meet repayment commitments, but it's one that has macroeconomic implications as well. The debt hangover that has endured over the past decade has undoubtedly hampered the UK's recovery from the financial crisis. It's unsurprising, therefore, that the recent surge in consumer debt credit growth has provoked some concerns that households are once again storing up problems for the future, especially with interest rates expected to rise. And they're basically saying that increasing numbers of people getting themselves into potentially really big trouble, particularly if interest rates rise slightly. And of course, it doesn't take very much for interest rates to rise when you're living in a low interest rate economy like we are at the moment. It doesn't take very much of a rise before people start to really suffer. This is really only one major hole in the economy. Let's remember the share of zombie companies. This came, well, it's been known about for a long time, but it hit the headlines again following the Carillion collapse. These are this is the levels of corporate debt that we're talking about, because we've got huge numbers of companies that don't bring in enough revenue on an annual basis to pay the interest payments on money that they owe. And I've shown this many times. This is more or less up to date now. You know, we've got government public debt of around 1.9 trillion pounds. Sorry, we've got household debt of around 1.9 trillion pounds. We've got corporate debt of around 1.6 trillion. It's probably more like 1.9 trillion now. And so you know, this bubble just continues to grow. This debt bubble, it is not repayable. And as I've said many times, the big elephant in the room, of course, is the unfunded state pension Ponzi scheme in this country. with the levels of debt that we're carrying, it's very hard to see how that black hole, £5 trillion, is going to be filled. I don't see how people can expect to have any kind of state pension in a few years' time. And perhaps that explains why people are being encouraged to consider how they die.
Well, hopefully they won't ever die if they're uploaded to the right cloud.
That's a whole other issue, isn't
George
it?
is working on it. Don't you worry.
Yes. Okay, and we're going to end with this one then. The Voice, the singing competition in France. Apparently, somebody's had to resign from that competition.
Yes, this singer from France. I'm sorry I can't pronounce her name right at the moment, but a woman after our own heart, surely. She's been sacked from The Voice, and because what they did is this is a new program, but they went and doxed her Twitter account for the last 5 years, all her critics or the people who, I don't know what they were looking for, but they found she tweeted a couple of amazing things. One is that during the France, I think there's Charlie Hebdo attacks or the terrorist attacks in France, she said, "Here we go again, another terrorist, every week there's another attack, and they always manage to leave their passport or ID magically on the seat of the car. Surprise, surprise." And so she got marked badly for that. And she also said she accused the Israeli IDF of terrorizing Palestinians during their siege on Gaza in 2014. So for those and other comments, she's been asked to leave the show. And then she's being investigated by the equivalent of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League in France. And they have their own version there. And so she's being called an anti-Semite, etc. So I think it's extraordinary, Mike, because this is the interesting here. The argument is that her tweets have traumatized and hurt people, but she made those tweets before anyone knew who she was. So no one actually has seen any of them. And they're not unlike many other tweets we see on Twitter, by the way. But because her critics are the people who wanted to bring her career down, made those old 3-4-year-old tweets public, then more people have seen them. So her critics have exposed this traumatic Twitter material to the public and caused all this so-called harm by the act of trying to defame her, which I find quite hypocritical in the sense as if that's what she's being charged as, is traumatizing people with hurtful speech on Twitter that was done in 2015 before she was famous. But this is the norm now, Mike. This is the norm.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. We will leave it there for today. Thank you for joining us. We will be back at the same time, 1 p.m. tomorrow. Brian will be back in the studio. If you like what we're doing, we would appreciate some support. We do need your support. If you can, please join us if you can via our membership or make a donation. It's much appreciated and put to good use. And we will be back tomorrow, as I say. So we will see you then. Bye-bye.